Hello there, welcome to the Jump to Lightspeed Rules Update lesson. Today we're going to go over Comprehensive Rules 4.0, what's changed, and what that means for the game. These aren't a part of any specific level or certification, but it's important to keep up to date. There will also be a lesson available on the updates to the tournament regulations and master event document for this set as well. Once both lessons are available, there will be a small quiz that you can take to prove your mastery and understanding of the changes for Jump to Lightspeed. We're just going to go through these in the order they're presented in the Comprehensive Rules and then tie things together it makes sense to do so. Let's dive in. In section 1.5.4, Ready and Exhausted, the rule, when a leader unit is deployed, it enters the ground arena ready, even if it was exhausted before. When a leader unit is defeated, it enters the base zone exhausted, even if it was ready before, has been removed. This was simply superfluous text, but it still remains true. In section 1.74, we have some clarification about rearranging resources. Players are allowed to make arrangements up until the point where a choice is made. Once the choice is made, resources are no longer allowed to be adjusted. If, for example, the active player plays DJ, Blatant Thief, using the Smuggle ability, the non-active player is allowed to rearrange their resources after the active player announces their trigger. However, once the active player selects a resource, let's say a ready resource, the non-active player is not allowed to continue to rearrange their resources. This isn't a change in philosophy, but rather clarifying the language. Section 1.8.7 makes it clear that the cost of a leader is the printed value, no matter whether or not resources were spent to deploy it. Despite Poe Dameron, I Can Fly Anything being able to be put into play as an upgrade for one resource, his cost is still 5. Then, in section 1.9, which covers damage, it has some new subsections and clarifications, particularly regarding damage prevention and unpreventable damage. The phrase can't be damaged means prevent all damage that would be dealt to this unit. In turn, unpreventable damage bypasses that damage prevention effect, as well as all others. This means that indirect damage, which is given a quick shout out here, can deal damage to your opponent's Lurking TIE Phantom or a Boba Fett upgraded with his armor. Section 1.16 adds a little bit of text that says that abilities with limited uses per phase or round count as progressing the game state, even if nothing else changes. Previously, it was explicit that activating Energy Conversion Lab and not playing a unit was progression because it was an epic action. However, there was some lack of clarity on abilities such as Magna Guard Wing Leader, which is now explicitly moving the game state forward even if you activate it while controlling no valid units with which you can attack. Furthermore, in the subsection covering game state resolutions, there's a small modification. Previously, it referred to unique units, but that's been updated to unique cards. This is because there are many unique pilots, and you cannot control both a unique unit and upgrade of the same card at the same time. Finally, section 1.18.1 also sees a small update, clarifying that players are responsible for defeating units that they are directly instructed to defeat. This clarifies that players defeat their own units due to the uniqueness rule, and they're also responsible for units defeated by, say, Emperor Palpatine, Galactic Ruler's leader side action ability. This does not change how Avenger hunting Star Destroyer or similar effects works. The controller of the Avenger is still the player responsible for defeating that unit. Throughout Section 2, there are a variety of updates to card templating. These are language updates without functional changes, as well as the rules describing how pilot text boxes work. The biggest change here is the existence of those text boxes. Pilots have a split text box. The top half is used when the card is a unit, and the lower half is used while it is an upgrade. However, the whole text box is taken into account when evaluating the card. This means that all pilots have a keyword, piloting, that can give them a buff through Boba Fett Daimyo, even if they have no other keywords, such as seen on Chewbacca, Faithful First Mate. Section 3 also has similar updates, accounting for new cards bringing new features to the game. Bases, such as Data Vault or Thermal Oscillator, can change your deck construction requirements, overriding the CR. There are also leaders that can now deploy through the use of an action ability instead of an epic action ability, and they can be deployed or put into play multiple times through that ability, such as Poe Dameron, I Can Fly Anything, and Admiral Trench, Chick 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 Chick. And yes, I had fun saying that title. There's also additional refinements regarding leaders being deployed and defeated as upgrades. Some leader pilots make it so that the vehicle they're attached to is treated as a leader itself. This means that it has protection from something like Vanquish, which would require it to be a non-leader. It also means that upgrading your mercenary gunship with a leader pilot is kind of a bad idea. For 4 resources, your opponent can take control of it, and by the rules, both the gunship and leader are defeated. We also have a few updates to tokens. They can now be given when played abilities, which are treated as when created abilities. For example, with Wedge Antilles' Czar of the Rebellion, if you create an X-Wing token, Ambush will trigger as though the X-Wing were played, not simply created. In Section 4, Zones, there are just a few small updates accounting for the new abilities that leaders have, as well as some for how cards can affect units based on arena. This applies to something like Blue Leader, Scarif Air Support. This is a space unit that can end up in the ground arena. Once it's in the ground arena, it can be affected by abilities that refer to ground units. For example, Bright Hope, the last transport, could pick up Blue Leader if it was moved to the ground arena. There's also only one update here in Section 5, Game Structure, and that's just to let you know that Chancellor Palpatine, playing both sides, and any other leaders like him in the future, will let you know which side starts the game face up. In Section 6, we'll start with one small clerical update, a redundant line in Section 6.4.0 about epic actions that was removed. There's also a larger update to 6.2.1a, which discusses declaring an intent and how pilots can be played. This primarily applies to playing a card as either an upgrade or a unit. If a player is playing the card as a result of an ability resolving that specifies a card type, the player is beholden to that type. For example, a player can only play pilots as units through U-Wing Reinforcement, and only as upgrades through a Fine Edition. However, Cobb Vanth, the Marshal, would allow you to play Dagger Squadron Pilot as either an upgrade or unit because it is only the search effect that has the type-based requirement, and the ability to play the card is associated with the card itself, not its type. We move on to Section 7, which has several updates. One that is notable is that in 7.1.6, where we talk about abilities that modify actions. Quote, if an ability instructs a player to take a modified action, any abilities triggered during or as a result of that action are considered nested abilities, end quote. This essentially means that if triggers that occur because of an event being played won't resolve until any actions caused by that event, and triggers associated with those actions have fully resolved. That's a bunch of words, so let's go through a notable example. What happens if you play Timely Intervention to play a Warzone Lieutenant while you control a Hondo Naka? That's good business. Timely is played, and Hondo triggers, but his ability has to wait to resolve until after Timely completes. This means that Warzone Lieutenant comes into play, and its ambush, granted by Timely, triggers and resolves before Hondo's ability. This doesn't change how, for example, Energy Conversion Lab works for the most part. The ambush it grants will still resolve in the same window as any when played abilities from the unit you played, so the player can sequence them in either order. To get hypothetical, if there was something that said, when you activate a base's ability, that trigger would resolve after any when played triggers from the played unit, along with the ambush. Similarly, Weequay Pirate Gang being smuggled isn't a modified action, so both its ambush and Hondo's abilities are resolving in the same window, and the controller can sequence them in either order. There's also some consolidation of information about epic actions that was removed from the other parts of the CR in 7.2.4. Now, both Ambush and Shielded see small language updates to include when deployed and when created as trigger conditions, in addition to the already existing when played. Saboteur also sees some language updates, taking agency away from the units and giving it back to the players. It used to say, this unit may ignore Sentinel when choosing, and now it says, you may ignore Sentinel while choosing. This doesn't actually change the way the game works at all, but now you no longer have to call a judge to give your Jawa Scavenger a slow play warning. And then we get to the meat of this section, piloting. This describes how the new mechanic works. You can only play a pilot on a friendly vehicle unit without a pilot upgrade on it, unless otherwise specified. You do so by paying the piloting cost instead of its printed cost. This is an alternate cost, so you can't also use Tech Source of Insight to smuggle out pilots. They're all honest. This cost is also going to be modified like a normal cost, including aspect penalties. Each piloting ability is separate, and a unit can have multiple piloting abilities, potentially with different costs. As mentioned before, if instructed to play a unit, a player can only play a pilot as a unit, or if instructed to play an upgrade, can only play pilot as an upgrade. Units with piloting are treated as units while in all out-of-play zones, and cards that look for upgrades won't see them in those zones. For example, Razor Crest, Reliable Gunship, won't be able to return a defeated pilot from your discard to your hand. This isn't explicitly called out in the rules, but when a pilot is defeated, it looks to see how it existed before it was defeated for the purposes of triggers. A pilot upgrade that is defeated won't trigger an opponent's Gideon Hask, Ruthless Loyalist, but if it went to the discard pile because the unit it was attached to was defeated, it would be eligible to be returned to your hand with Gar Saxon, Viceroy of Mandalore's triggered ability, because the ability checks to see how the card existed in play. There's also a bit more language here cleaning up triggers a little bit. This is important because of our new leader, Grand Admiral Thrawn. How unfortunate. He's on the lookout for when defeated triggers. Which of the following do you think are eligible to be duplicated by Thrawn? 1. Distant Patroller's when defeated ability. 2. Inferno 4, Unforgetting's when played / when defeated ability. And 3. Hylabon Enforcer's bounty ability. I'll give you a second to think about it, or hit pause if you need more than a second. Okay, that was a second. Distant Patroller absolutely triggers again. This one's straightforward enough. Inferno 4's ability also works. Triggered abilities with slashes in them count as both types of triggers, so Inferno 4 has a when played and a when defeated ability. Finally, Hylabon Enforcer's bounty will not trigger, no matter which player controls it. While it's an ability whose effect is the same as the triggered ability, when defeated or when captured, resolve the following ability, it is not actually a when defeated trigger. The words when defeated need to appear in bold on the card for it to be a when defeated ability. Similarly, you can duplicate the trigger from General Krell, Heartless Tactician, but not Gideon Hask, Ruthless Loyalist. General Krell's ability is a when defeated ability. Gideon Hask's, while it triggers from units being defeated, is not a when defeated ability. Chimera, reinforcing the center, also allows us to resolve when defeated triggers for cards that may still be in play. If that happens, do as much as possible and ignore any parts that are not relevant, as following the golden rules. In 8.4, discussing can and can't, there are two examples of can overriding can't, which runs contrary to the rest of the rules, as normally can't takes precedence. These two new rules state that a unit with Sentinel can always be attacked, even if it has a can't be attacked ability or effect, and unpreventable damage is always dealt, even if the unit or base has an ability that says it can't be damaged. There's also a functional update to the word lose. The term now means loses and can't gain, which affects Force Lightning and Spec Force Soldier. This brings them in line with more recently printed cards, such as Brain Invaders and Imprisoned, which both say lose and can't gain. This makes questions about Spec Force Soldier and the Gamorreans, both Guard and Retainer, a little bit easier to handle. Jumping down to 8.27, there's some clarifications and updates to how searching works, but nothing functional here. There are also some clarifications on the uniqueness rules, only one copy of a card, not delineated by type, and some clarifications on capturing, but again, no functional changes there either. Getting close to the end, we have our other new mechanic for the set, indirect damage. There are a few key elements about indirect damage. First, you choose a player who assigns the damage. It can be a player other than the one otherwise affected by the ability that is generating the indirect damage. For example, you can attack one player with a First Order Stormtrooper and have it deal its indirect damage to another player. You can even deal the indirect damage to yourself. The player who is assigning the damage must deal that much damage divided as they choose to any number of their units and their base. Indirect damage cannot be assigned in excess of a unit's remaining HP, so you can't just deal it all to Chirrut Îmwe. Indirect damage cannot be prevented, so it can damage and defeat a lurking TIE Phantom. Indirect damage ignores shield tokens. They do not prevent the damage and are not defeated. Indirect damage is still considered to be dealt by the player or unit from which the ability was generated, regardless of who assigned the damage, which is relevant for some triggered abilities. Finally, all indirect damage from a single ability happens simultaneously, and then the game state is processed. Wrapping up the additional rules for Jump to Lightspeed, we also have the word move. This allows players to take a unit from one arena and put it into the other when instructed to do so. Its status and any upgrades or damage remain on the unit and move with it. A card moving as a unit is not considered to enter or leave play. Finally, in 12.3, there's an explanation of how to determine Twin Suns aspects for leaders with different aspects on different faces. This again only applies to Chancellor Palpatine at this time, but may expand as we get more leaders. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us, and I encourage you to take the Jump to Lightspeed Mastery Quiz after you've looked at the policy updates when they're available. This quiz is not required, but it's a good way to make sure you're up to date with the new rules and mechanics. You can find more details about Mastery Quizzes on the page on Nexus. Until next time, good luck and have fun.